The wind came from the north that morning, steady and clean, the kind that carries the scent of coming weather long before the sky shows its hand. She stood at the trailhead, adjusting the straps on her pack, watching the two men beside her do the same with the casual efficiency of people who'd done this before, but not often enough to have learned all the lessons. They were good hunters, competent in their own right, but they carried that particular confidence of men who'd never been truly lost, never felt the ground disappear beneath certainty. She'd seen it before. Hell, she'd worn it herself once, years ago, before the mountains taught her otherwise. The older of the two, Marcus, squinted at the sky, pale gray and featureless, the sun barely a suggestion behind the overcast. Mid-50s, broad-shouldered, the kind of guy who'd grown up hunting these ridges with his father and figured that legacy was worth more than technique. The younger one, Devin, maybe 30, had all the gear, all the right brands, the kind of setup that cost more than her truck but hadn't yet earned a single dent or stain that mattered. They were here because she'd agreed to guide them into the high country for elk late season, when the big bulls pushed down from the peaks ahead of the storms. It was work, it paid, and she was good at it. She pulled a small tin from her vest pocket, the kind that once held mints, now packed tight with fine wood ash she'd collected from her stove at home. Marcus saw it, raised an eyebrow. "What's that, some kind of lucky charm?" His tone was light, teasing, the way men talk when they're trying to be friendly but can't quite hide the condescension. She smiled, not bothered. "You'll see," she said, and that was all. Devin glanced over, curious but silent, and she appreciated that about him. He watched more than he talked, at least so far. She tucked the tin back into her pocket, felt its small weight against her ribs, and started walking. The trail wound through lodgepole pine for the first mile, snow crunching underfoot, maybe 8 inches deep. Not enough to slow them, but enough to muffle the world into that peculiar quiet that only comes with winter. No birds, no wind yet, just the rhythm of boots and breath, the creak of pack straps, the occasional snap of a branch overhead shedding its load of snow. She set a steady pace, not fast, saving energy, reading the terrain as they climbed. The forecast had called for clear skies, light winds, nothing to worry about. But she'd checked 3 sources, not one, and the divergence in their predictions had been enough to make her pack extra. An emergency bivvy, fire starter redundancy, the ash. Marcus caught up to her after the first rest stop, his breath coming harder than hers despite being a man who clearly kept himself in shape. He nodded at her pack, heavier than his, heavier than Devin's. "You expecting a siege?" She shrugged. "Just what I always carry." He grunted, unconvinced, and she let it go. There was no point in explaining, not yet. People either learned by watching, or they learned the hard way, and she wasn't going to waste breath on theory when the mountain would teach the lesson better than she ever could. By midday, they'd climbed above the tree line, into that open country where the wind has nothing to stop it, and the snow lies in drifts sculpted into frozen waves, hard-packed and glittering. The sky had darkened imperceptibly at first, then all at once, the way weather changes in the high country. She stopped, studied the horizon. The men came up beside her, following her gaze. "Storm coming," Devin said, and she nodded. "Faster than expected. We should think about turning back or finding shelter soon." Marcus shook his head. "We haven't even reached the basin yet. That's where the elk are. If we turn back now, we'll have wasted the whole day." She looked at him, measured her words. "We can push another hour, maybe 2, but then we commit. If we're going to camp up high, we do it right. No shortcuts." He agreed, but she could see the calculation in his eyes, the part of him already thinking about the story he'd tell later, the trophy he'd take home. They pressed on, and the wind picked up, steady at first, then gusting, carrying with it the sting of ice crystals that hadn't yet become snow but would soon. She started marking the trail. Every 100 yards or so she'd stop, pull out the tin, and sprinkle a small pile of ash onto a rock or a windward drift, tamping it down with her glove, making sure it stuck. The ash was dark against the white, visible, distinct. Marcus noticed after the 3rd mark. "You really doing that?" She nodded, didn't break stride, It's cheap, it's light, and it works. He laughed, not cruel but dismissive. You know we have GPS, right? Compass, maps, all that good stuff. She kept walking. Redundancy? She said. Plus batteries die. Screens freeze. Compasses work until you drop them in a creek or crack the housing. Ash is just ash. Devon asked the question she'd been waiting for. But how do you follow it back? It's not like breadcrumbs, it won't last. She stopped, turned to face them both. That's the point, it's not for long range. It's for micro-navigation, for when you lose orientation in a whiteout and you need to find a specific point, a landmark, a line of return, something you can see in 12 steps, not 12 miles. Marcus frowned. That's ridiculous. If you're 12 steps away from something, you can already see it. She smiled, patient. Not in a whiteout. Not when the sky and ground are the same color and you can't tell up from down. Not when every direction looks identical and your brain starts lying to you about which way you came. The ash gives you a beacon, a point of certainty. You find it, you reorient. You take the next step. He shook his head, still skeptical, but she could see Devon thinking about it, filing it away. They reached the basin by early afternoon, a broad bowl rimmed with ridges, the kind of place where elk bed down in the timber and feed in the open at dawn and dusk. The wind was stronger now, sustained at maybe 20 miles per hour. Gusts higher and the first real snow had started, light flakes that swirled and danced rather than fell straight down. She dropped her pack near a cluster of stunted fir, the only cover for a quarter mile, and glassed the area. No elk, no tracks fresh enough to matter. The storm was pushing them lower, ahead of the front, and she knew it. Marcus saw the same thing, cursed under his breath. We should have started earlier. She didn't argue. Maybe, or maybe this is just how it is. Weather doesn't care about our schedules. Devon suggested they make camp, wait out the storm, try again in the morning. Marcus resisted. We've got a couple hours of daylight left. Let's split up, cover more ground, see if we can push something up. She started to object, to say that splitting up in deteriorating weather was a bad idea. But Marcus was already moving, talking over her. You two take the west ridge. I'll loop around to the north. We'll meet back here in 90 minutes. If anyone gets anything, fire a shot. We'll converge. And then he was gone, disappearing into the swirl of snow and wind, and she was left with a choice. Follow him, argue, waste time, or trust that he was competent enough to handle himself for an hour and a half. She chose the latter, but she didn't like it. She and Devon moved along the west ridge, glassing, stopping every few hundred yards to mark their route. She showed him how she placed the ash, how she angled the piles so the wind wouldn't blow them away immediately, how she used rocks or logs as anchors, how she spaced them close enough to see one from the next even in reduced visibility. He paid attention, didn't mock, didn't question. After the fourth mark, he asked if he could try. She handed him the tin. He took a pinch, placed it carefully on a flat stone, pressed it down with his thumb. Good, she said. Now remember this spot. Feel the terrain. Notice the angle of the slope, the shape of that tree, the way the wind hits your face. The mark is just a backup. Your brain is the primary tool. He nodded, handed back the tin, and they kept moving. The snow thickened. Within 30 minutes, visibility dropped to maybe 100 yards, then 50, then less. The wind shifted, coming now from the northwest, gusting hard enough to make them lean into it, hard enough to erase their tracks almost as fast as they made them. She checked her watch. They'd been out for 45 minutes. Time to turn back. They started retracing their steps, following the ash marks, each one exactly where she'd left it, dark and distinct against the white. Devon looked relieved, though he tried to hide it. This actually works, he said, and she heard the surprise in his voice. It's not magic, she replied. It's just attention to detail. They made it back to the cluster of fir in just under 30 minutes, fighting the wind the whole way, and Marcus wasn't there. She waited 10 minutes, then 15, scanning the whiteout, listening for a shot, for any sign. Nothing. 20 minutes. 25. The storm was worsening. The snow now horizontal, the wind screaming through the trees, and she made the call. We build shelter, we get warm, we wait. If he's not back in an hour, we go looking, but we do it smart. Devon agreed, no hesitation, and they set to work. She dug into the base of the largest fir using a snowshoe as a shovel, carving out a pit deep enough to get below the wind. Devon gathered dead branches, stripped the lower limbs from the surrounding trees, anything dry enough to burn. She pulled out her fire kit, a Ziploc bag with a lighter, waterproof matches, a ferro rod, and a bundle of fatwood shavings. Redundancy. Always redundancy. The first flame took on the third match, sheltered by her body and Devon's, and they nursed it carefully, feeding it twigs, then sticks, then larger branches, until they had a fire hot enough to matter, hot enough to push back the cold that was already creeping into their fingers and toes despite their gloves and boots. 40 minutes passed, then 50, then an hour. Marcus didn't come back. She looked at Devon, saw the worry in his eyes, saw him trying to hide it. "We need to go find him," he said. She nodded. "But we do it right. We move together. We mark as we go. And if we can't find him in 30 minutes, we come back, because getting all three of us lost doesn't help anyone." He agreed, and they geared up, doused the fire but left it ready to relight, cached their packs to save weight, and headed out into the storm. The wind was savage now, 40 miles per hour sustained, gusts higher, and the snow was falling so thick and fast that the world had shrunk to a radius of maybe 10 feet. Beyond that, nothing. Just white. She moved slowly, deliberately, placing ash marks every 20 yards instead of every 100, close enough to see one from the next, close enough to follow even in this. Devon stayed right behind her, one hand on her pack strap, tethered by touch because sight was useless. She shouted his name into the wind, "Marcus, Marcus," but the storm ate her voice, gave nothing back. They circled north, the direction Marcus had taken, following the ridgeline, stopping every few minutes to listen, to look, to mark. Nothing. She checked her compass, adjusted their heading, tried to think like him, to guess where he might have gone, what he might have been chasing. A gully opened to their right, steep-sided, invisible until they were almost on top of it, and she stopped, held up a hand. This is where he'd go if he jumped an elk, down into cover. Devon peered over the edge, shook his head. "We can't see anything down there. If he's in there, we won't find him until this clears." She knew he was right, but she also knew that leaving wasn't an option. Not yet. She placed an ash mark at the top of the gully, a big one, double the size of the others, and they started descending, testing each step, using rocks and brush for handholds. The wind eased slightly in the lee of the slope, but the snow was deeper here, thigh-deep in places, and every step was work. Halfway down she stopped, held her breath, listened. There. Faint, barely audible a voice. She shouted back, waited, heard it again. They pushed forward, angling toward the sound, and found him wedged under a deadfall, half covered in snow. His rifle gone, his left leg bent at an angle that made her stomach drop. Marcus looked up as they approached, his face gray with pain and cold. "Slipped on ice," he said through gritted teeth. "Went down hard. Can't put weight on it." She knelt beside him, checked the leg, felt the unnatural give above the ankle. Broken or badly sprained, either way he wasn't walking out. Devon started to panic, the words spilling out fast and anxious. "How do we get him back? We can't carry him, not in this, not up that slope." She held up a hand, made him stop, made him breathe. "One problem at a time. First, we get him warm. Then we stabilize the leg. Then we figure out extraction." She pulled off her parka, wrapped it around Marcus despite his protests, and sent Devon back up the slope to retrieve their packs. He hesitated, afraid to leave, afraid to go alone, and she pointed up at the ash mark she'd placed at the top of the gully. "You see that?" He squinted, barely visible through the snow, but there, dark against white. "Yeah. Follow the marks back to camp. Grab the packs, follow them back to me. You'll be fine. Just trust the system." He nodded, swallowed hard, and disappeared into the whiteout. She stayed with Marcus, used her knife to cut branches from the deadfall, fashioned a crude splint, immobilized the leg as best she could. He gritted his teeth through it, didn't cry out, but she could see the effort it took. "I screwed up," he said. "You were right. We shouldn't have split up. She didn't rub it in. It happens. We learn. We adapt. We get out of here." He asked about Devon, if he'd make it back, and she said yes without hesitation, because doubt wouldn't help anyone right now. 15 minutes later, Devon reappeared. Both packs on his shoulders, his face red with exertion but his eyes clear, focused. He found every mark, followed them exactly, and she felt a surge of pride despite the situation. They pulled out the emergency bivvy, a lightweight tarp, rigged it as a windbreak over Marcus, got him into dry gloves and a hat, fed him calories, chocolate and trail mix, and anything that would burn fast and give him energy to fight the cold. She started a small fire with the fat wood, just enough to warm their hands and boil water, and they took turns holding Marcus's feet against their bodies, sharing warmth, keeping the circulation going, watching for signs of frostbite. The storm raged for another 2 hours, and then, as suddenly as it had come, the wind eased, the snow thinned, and the sky began to show patches of pale gray. She stood, stretched, surveyed the gully. They were maybe 300 yards from camp, down a slope that Marcus couldn't climb alone. But the weather was breaking, which meant they had options. She pulled out her satellite communicator, thumbed through the menu, sent a distress signal with their coordinates, a brief description of the injury, a request for evacuation when conditions allowed. The message sent. Now they waited. Devon asked how long, and she said maybe a few hours, maybe until morning, depending on whether the helicopter could fly in these conditions. They settled in, kept the fire going, kept Marcus warm and conscious, and as the light began to fade, she thought about the ash marks, about the 12 steps, about the moment Devon had followed them back through the whiteout and reappeared out of the white with the packs, with hope, with proof that the system worked. It wasn't about marking miles. It was about creating certainty in a world that had none, about giving yourself a lifeline when everything else failed, about trusting the small things because the big things could vanish in an instant. The helicopter arrived just after dawn, the pilot threading his way up the gully with a skill that bordered on reckless, hovering just long enough for the medic to drop a litter and secure Marcus, then lifting off in a blast of rotor wash that scattered snow and ash and left them standing in sudden silence. She and Devon hiked out slowly, following the ridgeline back to the trailhead, and they didn't talk much, just moved through the quiet morning with the weight of what had happened settling into their bones. At the truck, he turned to her, started to say something, stopped, tried again. "That ash thing," he said finally. "I get it now." She nodded. "Good, don't forget it." A week later, she got a message from Marcus, sent from his hospital room. The leg in a cast but healing, no permanent damage, just a reminder of consequences. He thanked her, apologized for being stubborn, said he'd been thinking about the marks, about the method, about how something so simple had made the difference between finding him and not. She wrote back, kept it brief. "The tools don't matter if you don't use them. Redundancy isn't paranoia. It's just good practice." He replied with a thumbs-up emoji, and she smiled, closed the laptop, and went back to packing her kit for the next trip, checking each item, replacing the ash in the tin, making sure everything was where it needed to be. The thing about survival, the thing people forget when they're sitting comfortable and safe, is that it's not about dramatic moments or heroic decisions. It's about the small things, the boring things, the habits you build when nothing's wrong. So they're automatic when everything goes sideways. The ash marks weren't magic. They were just attention applied consistently, a system built on repetition and trust, a way of saying to the mountain, to the storm, to the chaos of the wild, "I see you, I respect you, and I'm prepared." And 9 times out of 10, that's enough. The 10th time, well, that's why you have backups and backups for the backups, and you never, ever assume that experience exempts you from consequences. She thought about Marcus, about Devon, about the moment in the whiteout when visibility dropped to nothing and Devon had stood at the top of that gully, squinting through the snow, barely able to see the ash mark, but finding it, trusting it, following it down and back up again, reappearing like a ghost made solid. 12 steps, not 12 miles. Just 12 steps from lost to found, from panic to orientation, from maybe to certain. And that was the lesson, the one she'd tried to teach with words, but could only truly convey through experience. Navigation isn't about knowing where you are. It's about having a way to find out, even when every sense you have is screaming contradictions, even when the world has erased itself and left you standing in white nothing with only your training and your tools and your refusal to quit. She ran the scenario in her head, the way she always did after a close call, looking for mistakes, for improvements, for lessons. They should have turned back earlier, sure, but hindsight is easy, and weather is fickle. Marcus shouldn't have split the group, but pride and ambition make people do stupid things, herself included. The real win was the recovery, the fact that they'd stayed calm, worked the problem, used the tools they had, and everyone got out. That was the standard. That was what mattered. The ash marks had done exactly what they were supposed to do. They'd created a visible trail in conditions where nothing else would have worked, where GPS was just numbers on a screen that told you coordinates but didn't help you see, where a compass could point north but couldn't show you the way back, where your own tracks disappeared in minutes and memory became unreliable, and the only thing you could trust was something physical, something you could touch and see and follow. The marks had given Devon a path through the chaos, a sequence of certainties that added up to rescue, and she'd watched him transform from anxious to focused the moment he saw that first pile of ash at the top of the gully, dark against the snow, exactly where it was supposed to be. She wondered if he'd use the method himself, if he'd pack a tin of ash on his next trip, if he'd teach it to others. She hoped so. Not because she needed credit or validation, but because good ideas should spread, because survival knowledge is a commons, something everyone contributes to and everyone benefits from. And the more people who understand the principle of redundancy, of micronavigation, of building systems that work when everything else fails, the fewer bodies get carried off mountains in the spring thaw. That was the goal. That was always the goal. She'd been guiding for 15 years, had seen all kinds of clients, from rank beginners to supposed experts, and the pattern was always the same. The people who struggled weren't the ones who lacked skill or strength. They were the ones who lacked humility, who assumed that confidence was a substitute for preparation, who believed that because they'd done something 50 times without incident, the 51st would be the same. The mountains didn't care about your resume. The storms didn't check your credentials. Nature was indifferent, not malicious, and it would kill you with the same dispassion it used to grow trees and carve valleys, not because you deserved it, but because you'd made mistakes, and mistakes in that environment have consequences. The ash marks were her way of tilting the odds, of adding a layer of insurance against the inevitable moments when plans fell apart and circumstances conspired, and suddenly, you were in a situation where the difference between life and death came down to whether you could find your way back to shelter, to warmth, to safety. They were cheap, they were light, they were simple, and they worked. That was the calculus. Not fancy, not impressive, not something you'd brag about at parties. Just effective. And in the backcountry, effective beats everything. She thought about the other methods she used, the other layers of redundancy she'd built into her kit and her practice. The compass that lived on a cord around her neck, so even if she lost her pack, she'd still have direction. The fire starter in 3 different forms, so if one failed, she had backups. The calorie-dense food in multiple pockets, so she could feed herself even if the main stash was inaccessible. The knowledge in her head, accumulated over years of paying attention, of studying, of learning from mistakes both her own and others. None of it was revolutionary. All of it was necessary. The rescue had cost Marcus a broken leg and a helicopter bill that would make him wince, but it could have been worse. If they hadn't found him when they did, if the storm had lasted another day, if the ash marks hadn't worked and Devon had gotten turned around and they'd both ended up lost, the outcome would have been different. Hypothermia doesn't care about intentions. Frostbite doesn't negotiate. The cold is patient and thorough, and it will take everything from you if you let it, 1 degree at a time, one mistake compounding into the next until there's no way back. She'd seen it before, the aftermath, the reports that came out months later when the snow melted and someone found what was left. Always the same themes: inadequate preparation, poor decision-making, a series of small errors that snowballed into catastrophe. And always, always the sense that it could have been prevented, that if just 1 or 2 things had gone differently, the person would have walked out instead of being carried out or left up there until the spring. That weight, that knowledge was part of why she did what she did, why she insisted on redundancy, why she carried the ash. The conversation with Devon after they got back to the trailhead had been short but significant. He'd asked if she taught courses, if she took on private students, if he could hire her to spend a week in the backcountry learning the techniques she used. She'd said maybe, that she'd think about it. But the truth was she was already thinking about how to structure it, what to cover, how to convey not just the mechanics but the mindset, the constant low-level paranoia that kept you alive, the habit of asking what if, the refusal to assume anything was guaranteed. Teaching was hard because survival skills weren't just about knowledge, they were about judgment, about developing the instinct to recognize when a situation was degrading from manageable to dangerous. And that instinct came from experience, from reps, from the muscle memory of having been scared and having worked through it and having come out the other side. She loaded her gear into the truck, checked each item as it went in, the habit so ingrained she barely noticed she was doing it. Pack check, rifle check. Sleeping bag, bivvy, stove, fuel, food, water filter, first aid, comms, navigation, fire, tools, repair kit. Everything in its place, everything accounted for. She climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, let it warm while she pulled out her phone and scrolled through messages. A few from other clients, asking about availability, about dates, about conditions. One from a friend, checking in, making sure she was still alive. She replied to that one first, just a quick thumbs up and a promise to call later, then put the phone away and started driving. The road down from the mountains was slow, winding, snow-packed in places despite the plows, and she drove carefully, no rush, no urgency, just the steady progress of someone who'd learned that speed was overrated and caution was survival. She thought about the headline, the one that had sparked this whole thing, about people laughing at the Ashmark Trail until it proved itself. She'd never cared about being laughed at. Let people mock what they didn't understand. She'd still be the one walking out while they were still trying to find the trailhead. The 12 steps thing was the key, the concept that made the whole method click. People thought navigation was about distance, about plotting a course from point A to point B across miles of terrain, and sure, that was part of it. But it wasn't the hard part. The hard part was micro-navigation, was maintaining orientation when you couldn't see landmarks, when the world became a featureless blur, and your brain started playing tricks and you needed something external, something real, something you could touch and confirm and use as an anchor point. The ash marks provided that. They weren't for getting you from the parking lot to camp. They were for getting you from disoriented to oriented, from lost to found, in the span of a few steps, a few seconds, before panic set in and decisions got worse. Devon had learned that lesson in real time, had felt the spike of fear when he stood at the top of the gully and couldn't see anything, had experienced the relief when he spotted the ash mark and suddenly had direction again, had path, had purpose. That transformation from anxious to capable was what teaching was about, not just showing someone how to do a thing, but helping them understand why the thing mattered, what it felt like when it worked, what the stakes were if it didn't. She couldn't give him her experience, couldn't shortcut the years of trial and error, but she could give him tools and principles and the confidence to use them, and that was enough. The storm that had nearly killed Marcus was gone now, blown out to the east, leaving behind blue skies and blinding sun and that crystalline cold that makes the air hurt in your lungs. Beautiful, deceptive, the kind of day that makes people forget how dangerous the mountains can be, how fast conditions can change, how thin the line is between an adventure and a disaster. She'd seen it too many times. The nice day that turned ugly, the easy hike that became an epic, the confident group that became a rescue operation. Complacency was the real killer, not the weather, not the terrain, not even bad luck. Just the slow erosion of caution, the assumption that because things were fine, they'd stay fine. The failure to prepare for the moment when fine became catastrophic in the span of minutes. She pulled into her driveway as the sun was setting. The sky lit up in shades of orange and pink that would have been gorgeous if she'd had the energy to appreciate them. Instead, she just felt tired. The bone-deep weariness that comes from adrenaline crash and physical exertion, and the mental load of keeping people alive. She unloaded the truck methodically, same order every time, checked the gear for damage, hung the wet stuff to dry, restocked what needed restocking. The ash tin was nearly empty. She dumped the remains, scooped fresh ash from the wood stove in her living room, packed it tight, sealed the lid, placed it back in her vest pocket, ready for next time. Inside, she made coffee, strong and black, and sat at the kitchen table with her laptop, pulling up the calendar, looking at upcoming trips. 2 elk hunts, a backcountry skiing expedition, a winter camping course for a group of college kids who probably had no idea what they were getting into. She'd teach them. She'd show them the ash marks, the redundancy principles, the micro-navigation concepts, and some of them would get it and some wouldn't, and that was fine. The ones who got it would pass it on, would use it when it mattered, would maybe save their own lives or someone else's, and that would ripple outward, one person at a time, one trip at a time, one less body in the spring thaw. The email from Marcus had included a note at the end, a postscript that made her smile despite herself. He'd written, "I told the story to the guys at work, about the ash marks, about how you found us." They laughed, said it sounded ridiculous that GPS is all anyone needs, that old-school tricks are just nostalgia. I told them they were wrong. I told them to ask me again when they get lost in a whiteout with a dead battery and no backup. Some of them are actually asking for your contact info now. Thought you'd find that funny. She did find it funny, in a grim sort of way. The cycle repeated endlessly. Skepticism, experience, conversion. Most people needed to see it to believe it. Needed to feel the fear and the relief and the realization that simple tools could save your life, if you used them right. She replied to Marcus, gave him her number to share, said she'd be happy to talk with anyone who was genuinely interested, but that she didn't have time for debates or hypotheticals. Either you wanted to learn or you didn't. Either you respected the mountain or you didn't. And if you didn't, well, eventually the mountain would teach you, and the lesson wouldn't be gentle. She finished the coffee, rinsed the mug, and walked outside to check the woodpile. The stars were out now, brilliant and cold, and the temperature was already dropping, frost forming on the truck windshield, the night settling in with that particular stillness of deep winter. She stood there for a moment, breathing the cold air, feeling the ache in her legs and shoulders, the satisfaction of work done and people saved and another trip in the books. Tomorrow she'd rest. The day after she'd start preparing for the next one. That was the rhythm, the pattern, the life she'd chosen, or that had chosen her. She wasn't always sure which. The ash marks would keep working, whether people believed in them or not, whether they laughed or nodded or ignored the whole thing entirely. The method was sound, the principle was proven, and the next time someone got caught in a whiteout and couldn't see their hand in front of their face and thought they were going to die out there, alone and lost, maybe they'd remember the story, the huntress who used ash to navigate, and maybe they'd try it themselves, and maybe it would work for them too. 12 steps, not 12 miles. Just 12 steps from lost to found, and that was all anyone needed, really. Just a way to find the next step, and then the next, and then the next, until they were safe. If you're watching this and you've ever been in the backcountry, if you've ever felt that moment of doubt, when the trail disappears and the landmarks vanish, and you realize you're not entirely sure which way is back, then you understand why redundancy matters, why simple tools can be the difference. why it's worth carrying that extra weight and learning that extra skill and refusing to assume that because you've been fine before, you'll be fine next time. The mountains are patient teachers but harsh graders, and the final exam is pass or fail with no retakes. Don't wait until you're in the situation to wish you'd prepared better. Do the work now, build the habits now, practice the skills now, so that when the moment comes and everything goes sideways, you're ready. And if this story resonated with you, if you found value in the lesson, if you want to see more content about real survival skills, practical techniques, and the hard-earned wisdom that comes from actually spending time in the wild instead of just talking about it, then subscribe to the channel. Hit that button, join the community. Because every person who learns these skills, who understands these principles, who takes the time to prepare properly, is one more person who walks out of the mountains instead of being carried out. That matters. You matter. And I'd rather spend my time teaching people who want to learn than mourning people who didn't think they needed to. So subscribe, share the video. Leave a comment about your own experiences with navigation or survival situations, and let's build a community of people who respect the wild, who prepare properly, and who understand that survival isn't about being tough or lucky. It's about being smart and humble and relentlessly, systematically prepared for when things go wrong, because they will, eventually. And when they do, you want to be the person with the ash marks, not the person wishing they'd listened.